Hi, welcome back. This is Botany 101 and my name is Angela Nishimoto. I'm your guide for this class. Okay, you remember the last couple of times, the last few lectures we've been talking about food, Remember that food is one of the main contributions that plants make to our existence? Okay, so we're going to continue in that way today, all right? So today, we're going to be doing starchy staples. That sounds good, doesn't it? Yeah? Alrighty, so our objectives for today, okay, two pretty short ones, right? For one thing, we're going to talk about how many of these starchy staples are actually storage organs of the plant, because one of the things you have to remember is that the storage organs or any other part of the plant is for the plant. It's not necessarily for us. The motivation really isn't there, even if you could talk about motivation in a plant, okay? Secondly, we're going to do a little survey of the main starchy staples that is used by humans today, all right? Okay, so for one thing, many plants have as food reserves for themselves to kind of protect them against bad times in the form of starch. And as you recall, I think we've been through this maybe three times. One of the components of starch is a substance called amylose, right? So amylose is actually a polymer of glucose. Yeah, glucose is that monosaccharide, and you link up the glucose units to each other, and one way they could do is they could make starch, okay? So we have amylose, and another component of starch, of course, is amylopectin. So these are the two main components of starch, okay? Sort of polymers of glucose, okay? So remember that. We're going to talk about that a little bit later, all right? So a lot of these food reserves, many times for the plants, okay, these organs, whether they be storage stems or storage roots, oftentimes these organs tend to be underground, under the ground. So the plant will actually have these organs, to kind of use for storage to guard against hard times, okay? Such as here we have a turnip, okay? So this obviously is, it could be a rutabaga, and I know a rutabaga is sort of like a turnip. Have you ever eaten turnips? I know many people in Hawaii might not have eaten turnips before. Okay, so you can actually cook it, slice it, and boil it, or you could bake it, I guess, too. I think most times people boil it, but you can put butter and sugar and like that on it. It's okay, I myself, I wasn't raised with turnips, so I wasn't used to it, but sometimes you just like to investigate. Yes, so one time I bought a couple of rutabagas and I cooked them, and they're pretty good, okay? So in this underground organ, we saw a taproot, okay, a taproot type, where you have one main root with a storage organ, and this is a plant that probably has a life cycle that is a biennial. All right, so it actually germinates, grows, does photosynthesis, stores sugar or other substances, other carbohydrates in its roots, and then overwinters, and then the next year it sends up a flowering stalk. Okay, so it's a biennial. It lives its life cycle over 2 years. Right, so this is one, a taproot. Okay, this would be a rutabaga or turnip. Okay. You also have other kinds of storage roots, such as this, I believe, is yam. Look how huge they are, yeah? So these organs, this is a storage root. So the rutabaga that you saw earlier is a root, and these yam roots are also storage organs, okay? And another thing that these food reserves could be used for too, okay, so they're very starchy oftentimes, all right? Another function of these organs can be asexual propagation. Remember we talked about asexual propagation before, where a plant can actually kind of give birth to clones of itself, okay? Even the term give birth is sort of too active for what plants do, but still, they can do asexual propagation where you only have one parent for the offspring plant or plants. Okay, so here this is actually showing asexual propagation from a leaf. This is leaf of kalanchoe or kalanchoe. I know both pronunciations are used. This is a leaf, and here you see these little keiki, these vegetative plant propagules coming off a leaf. Okay, so this is another example of asexual propagation, and we will talk a little bit about asexual propagation as regards to different storage organs of the plant. Okay. So asexual propagation, remember that that's something that plants can do that we can't, okay, as not right now anyway. Another thing about these underground storage organs is that they tend to be highly productive. You get a lot of biomass, a lot of product, for what you put into it. Here's some sweet potatoes. Okay, I think you've seen this image before. Very highly productive. So what you do is you have a lot of foodstuffs, okay, coming from, and you don't have to feed them oftentimes, like this sweet potato. Very notorious or very famous in a good way, in that you can grow it in areas that the soil is not so good. You know, you could, in Hawaii, people could even grow it in a place that had a lot of lava rocks still yet, and you'd have these areas where you have maybe more soil broken down, so they could cultivate potatoes in there, you know, and not have to tend to them all the time, sweet potatoes, okay? So highly productive, a lot of these. So for the plant, these organs functioned as food insurance for hard times, and they can also do the same for us in other ways too. Food insurance against hard times, okay? Alrighty then, okay. Some important crops, the big three that we're going to be talking about today include the sweet potato, which is the one you see in the center, okay. Potato or white potato that you see over here on the left, and these are many varieties of the white potato. Some people call them Peruvian potatoes, other people call them Irish potatoes, because they are most closely associated with Irish people, okay, in Europe and in North America anyway. And then we have cassava, okay, also known as manioc. People also call it tapioca, okay? And so this potato, white potato, sweet potato, and cassava, these are among the top 10 crops, okay? And also these different kinds of food storage organs tend to be high in carbohydrates, but they also tend to be low in proteins and also low in fats as well. Some of them have no fat at all, okay? So here, this is an image you folks have seen from your text before. You can see that the four big crops grown around the world, you know, this I believe is internationally, sugarcane, maize or corn, rice, and wheat. These four are grains, right? These are not grains, but these are grasses, yeah? Grasses, and then you have sweet potatoes here at number 5. You have cassava here at number 6. Furthermore, you have the sweet potatoes here, okay, at number 8. Okay, so they're all within the top 10 of the types of plants that people cultivate that are used for food in terms of the metric tons that are produced. Okay, you also have down here something we're not going to talk about that much today, but I just wanted to mention it. Where is it? Here it is. Bananas, because in some places in the world, you know, we in Hawaii and we in the United States tend to eat bananas as like a dessert or a sweet vegetable. We tend to eat sweet bananas that you can eat raw. Other places in the world, such as Africa, they have another kind of banana, many different varieties of which they're called plantains. They're more starchy. Okay, so in some places in the world, they really rely on starchy, not sweet bananas for a carbohydrate source. Okay, so this we probably won't talk about a lot today, but we might mention it a little bit later. Okay, just to keep in mind, bananas a possible other source of carbohydrates. Okay, for people. All right. Now, okay, we also have modified stems. We were just talking about storage roots, and now we're looking at modified stems. And here is sort of like an image that's sort of like you folks have seen several times already, and this is a modified stem of a kalo plant or taro, yeah? Remember that this is called a corm, right? Okay, so modified stems. And they can function in reproduction as well, okay? So this is an image of a liverwort, which doesn't actually have leaves, so this is not a leaf of a liverwort. But what you see is little baby liverwort plants being produced asexually, okay, without sex. So it only has this one parent plant, okay, producing these 3 little keiki. And here's a white potato, or a Peruvian potato, or Irish potato. And each of these little things here, actually these little shoots have developed from where the eyes are on the potato, which we call nodes. Remember, nodes and internodes, okay, are part of the stem, okay? So each of these individual sprouts can actually make a new plant from every single eye in the potato, okay? So these modified stems can function in reproduction as well, asexual reproduction, okay? And of course, they serve as food storage organs. Here, a whole bunch of different kind of white potato varieties here at some market somewhere. Yeah, look at the prices on them. Maybe these are organic or something, but still, very, very important source of starches for us humans, okay? So these modified stems, what makes a stem a stem? Okay, think about it. Here we have an image of pothos, okay, Epiprimnum aureum, okay, aureum, all right? This is a common pothos plant that we see a lot in Hawaii. So here you can see different parts of the stem. What makes a stem a stem? Why is a stem not a root? Why is a stem not a leaf? Remember, those are the 3 vegetative organs of a plant, the root, the stem, and the leaf. So what qualifies a stem to be a stem? Okay, think about it for a minute. Okay, this is one answer I'm going to answer if you can't think about it. Anyway, so think about it. Try to rack your brain, try to stir up those memories that we've had from earlier in the semester. Okay, so what makes a stem a stem? Okay, for one thing, stems have nodes and stems have internodes. Okay, they have nodes and internodes, whereas roots do not have nodes and internodes, neither do leaves. Okay, so that is actually what makes a stem a stem. It's like the definition of a stem. You have a place where there are nodes and spaces between the nodes, which are called internodes. Okay? All right, then I'm going to talk about some modified stems. Okay, I'm going to go through them and then I'm going to show you some on the Elmo as well. Okay? So types of modified stems. Remember, rack your brain, go back into the not so distant past and try to think of these kind of modified stems that are modified for storage and or asexual reproduction. For one thing, remember we have stolons or runners. And here, this is some kind of plant here, okay? And here you can see the kind of pinkish parts of it. These are stolons or runners, all right? The stolon and runner is sort of referred to interchangeably. And if you look here under the Elmo, here you see a grass. Okay, this is probably some kind of centipede grass or something. I'm not sure, I'm not strong on my grasses, but here you can see that this is an above ground stem. You can tell because the stem is green. Generally, and when something is green, it does photosynthesis, and the stem would not be green if it were underground, where the light would not, stimulate the organ to produce chlorophyll, right, and chloroplasts in there. So here you can see at each of these nodes, you have what they call adventitious roots. So this is a horizontal, above ground stem, and this, whatever the mama plant was, could actually make more plants from this. Okay, so this is a stolon or a runner, which can function above ground portion of a stem that can function in reproduction. Okay, so that's what we see right there. Okay, now other kinds of modified stems includes rhizomes. Okay, there's ginger, very nice image. I did bring ginger for you folks to look at, but we already have a nice image, so I won't have you guys look at the Elmo right now. Okay, but maybe a little later. We also have tubers as well. Potatoes, excellent example. Okay, so this is potatoes here on the left. Okay, and here you have something called oca. I know that you folks have seen this image before as a tuber, but this is apparently grown in, I believe it's in South America. Okay, South America or Africa, and this is actually another good source, okay, of different kinds of carbohydrates. I've never tasted that myself, but you can. I think that if I ever see it, like at a farmer's market or something, if I can find a way to cook it or prepare it, I think I would try it. Because it's always good to try new foods. That's one of the reasons why people oftentimes stay within their sort of comfort zone with the foods that they buy and the foods they prepare and the foods that they eat. Is sometimes if somebody's a cook, if they don't know how to prepare it, they don't want to be spending money on something that they're not sure how to cook and how to experiment with. Of course, people who are cooks or chefs for a living, it is an art. It is actually an art, where somebody puts together a meal, throwing things together. Sometimes they go by their gut, and they sometimes succeed, and sometimes they don't. Even visual artists do the same thing. Sculpture, three-dimensional artists, different kinds of media that people might do some kind of art in. Generally, you have some that really, really work very well. You have a whole bunch that doesn't work, and you have to work on it a little later. You have to kind of fine-tune it and work on it for the rest of your life. And there are others that are sort of okay, but they're not your best work. This is just what happens with any kind of art. You succeed very well a little bit of the time, and then you have varying degrees of success as well. Okay, so cooking. Okay, cooking is an art. All right, that's something that I hope to learn more about in the future. We also have bulbs, and this I think is a shallot. Okay, shallot and shallot. Yeah, and this is actually a relative of the onion, of course. Yeah, relative of the leek. Okay, relative of chives. Okay, it's all in a plant family called the Liliaceae. Okay, so these bulbs have their storage in these leaf bases. Remember, we talked about this before, that an onion or any sort of bulb is actually where the plant is storing its food, is in the leaf bases, because here, this dried up part of the shallot, just like in an onion, this papery part is actually a dried up leaf, all right? Whereas the stem of the plant is really, really compressed at the very bottom. Okay, so if we actually look on the Elmo here, okay, here I have a little bit of a round onion, all right? And this little part here, okay, this little area here, this is actually the stem from here, and it kind of goes up inside. When you chop an onion, it has a certain appearance to it, right? And when you cut it in half longitudinally, it has, that center area there, which is the meristem, right? And the rest of the stem in here is partly of the compressed stem. And these little dried up things here, of course, are the roots, okay, of the onion, all right? Alrighty, so, okay, so we have bulbs as well, all right? And of course we have corm. So this is a corm. I think this is a corm of ornamental plant, okay? Gladiolus or something like that, all right? And of course, here in Hawaii, we have the kalo, okay, as what you can see under the elmo here, right? So here we have a corm of a kalo plant, okay? And this is actually taro, okay? I know I called it before araimo because a lot of what we're looking at today came from earlier in the semester, so here's a rather wizened corm, all right, rather old, but still, I kind of scratched it and sniffed it, and it still smelled like, you know, that starchy taro smell. You know, it smelled good. So it's probably using its food reserves now to keep it alive because I haven't been watering it or doing anything to it. Yes, plants, they want to live, you know. So this here, okay, so this is called araimo, also known as dashin, all right? But in other places in the world, they do refer to it as taro. Okay, so this is another kind of variety of taro, even though that's not exactly the type that people used to use to make poi with, okay, which people like to do here locally. We'll talk about taro a little bit later, okay, also known as kalo, Colocasia esculenta, okay? So we also have some storage roots, okay? And these include what they call tuberous roots. So oftentimes these roots, similar to the potato stem, is called a tuber, okay? And here we have some roots, sliced or cut up roots of cassava sitting in water, which is part of the way that people process it to get rid of some, you know, some chemicals that people don't really like to eat. We'll talk more about that a little bit later. So these storage roots tend to be tuberous. You call them tubers, okay, such as yam, such as cassava, okay? So the first in our short survey, okay, of different kinds of plant storage organs that we humans use as a source of starch, okay, or other kinds of carbohydrates is what we call the white potato, okay? The scientific name of it is Solanum tuberosum, okay, Solanum tuberosum. And Solanum is a rather kind of large genus, okay? And then, of course, the Solanums are all in the Solanaceae, so this is a plant family. Some people also call this family the nightshade family because among some of the relatives of the potato include the mandrake, okay, the nightshade, what they call the deadly nightshade, okay, and also something called henbane. So in Europe, these are all considered to be poisonous, okay, poisonous or hallucinogenic. They can cause some bad effects in people if you take it. Here's the little potato plant, okay. You can see that the potato plant is actually a plant. Yeah, so these little tubers that grow at the ends of underground rhizomes, and these are actually other storage stems, okay, they are actually from a plant. Okay, sometimes because most of us, we get our food from the supermarket, we are sort of have a disconnect in our head between food and between the plants that produce them. So hopefully, I'm hoping that this program has kind of taught you that generally, you know, they come from plants. They really do. And this is a good thing that people should learn. I'm a firm believer that everybody should know how to grow food. Okay, just in case, you never know when you might need emergency needs like that, okay? So here, this white potato originally from the Andean region of South America, okay? It was a major staple of the Inca civilization. And here is a little piece of South America with the area shaded in dark green, part of the Inca Empire a long time ago, okay? So the Inca, of course, were pretty much wrecked and destroyed by the Spanish, okay? And what happened is that their staple from the Andes was taken to Spain in the 1500s. Remember, so one of the things that your text talks about, I thought the authors were so eloquent about this. They actually found out later on that despite the fact that, I guess they took emeralds, you know, Colombian emeralds as well as gold, melting down a lot of the pre-Columbian artifacts. So think about the word, pre-Columbian. That means before Columbus sort of discovered the so-called New World, okay? So pre-Columbian artifacts, and what a lot of the Spanish did, they melted them down, sent them back to Spain. So this is one of the big reasons why during the colonial era, why Europe was so rich is because they pretty much, you know, in a word, plundered a lot of different places, you know, Asia, Africa, South America, and etc. And the vestiges of colonialism are still with us. My husband calls it the colonial chickens coming home to roost, you know. Anyway, so here you have Spain, okay, a recipient from the Andean area, okay, of the potato. So they said even with the emerald, even with the diamond, that's from Africa, but the emeralds, gold, and other some such that was exported out of the Americas back to Europe, the biggest and most valuable thing turned out to be a plant, which was the potato, okay? From Spain, you know, in the 1500s, then it disseminated throughout Europe. okay, through the days, the 1500s into the 1600s. But at the time, so they kind of disseminated through Europe, okay, because remember, it came from the Andean region, so it could tolerate cool weather, okay. Remember, the Andes are very high mountains, very cool up there. Okay, you might not think so because it's sort of near where the equator is, all right, but no, it's very high elevation. So usually the higher in elevation you go, the cooler it is, okay. Now in Europe, pretty much from the 1500s into maybe the 1700s, generally it was thought to be worthy only for livestock, okay, only for feeding pigs and, you know, goats or whatever people were growing for food, you know, cattle. Okay, it was thought to fit only for livestock food. And if you think back, what was another kind of plant material that we eat today and we think of as good, but in the olden days they thought that it was fit only for horses or for other animals. Think about it. It's actually a grass family member. Remember what it's called? Yeah, it's actually oats. You know, all those nice oat cakes that you can get at like a coffee shop in Honolulu and other places. It's actually in Honolulu and on Oahu. Very excellent oat cakes, you know. This is delicious. And you know, a few hundred years ago, a millennia ago, generally 2 millennia ago, the Romans wouldn't touch it. Okay, they considered it fit only for horses. They would starve rather than eat the oats. Okay, now in the 1800s, then furthermore, okay, the potato was finally accepted and eaten by people. Okay, people could eat this. They found, and one of the great reluctances, one of the reasons why the Europeans were reluctant to start eating the potato was because, like the tomato, like other kinds of members of the nightshade family, they thought it was poisonous or that it was bad for some reason. And I think in some places in Europe they had the idea that if something was grown underground, it was like a product of the devil, because of course the devil and hell was under the ground, right? People, when they think literally of what hell was, you know? So generally people had this kind of bias against it because it was grown underground, so they thought that it was probably the devil's sort of, you know, sort of food, okay? That's how just people thought before, you know, and I think some people who might not, you know, who might have magical thinking might still think that kind of stuff was just kind of scary when you think about it, okay? So in the 1800s it was finally eaten by people, all right? So here we have a couple of images showing people, okay, these women here, you know, with their long skirts, harvesting potatoes, all right? So in Europe, even after the potato began to be accepted by humans as food, generally were poorer people who ate it, okay? So this is an image of a painting by Vincent van Gogh, and this is called The Potato Eaters. And when you look at these people, don't you feel a little bit sad? You know, they're kind of disheveled looking, they're wearing brown homespun clothes, not fancy clothes at all, and what they're eating is potatoes. That's about all they have to eat, okay? Because poor people could afford to grow potatoes, because potatoes have a special quality. They, you know, similar to sweet potatoes in another context, okay, can be grown in poor soils, rocky soils, you know, soils that don't have a whole lot of nutrients in it. Because in Ireland, which is, of course is associated with potatoes, Irish potatoes, white potatoes, there you had a lot of poor people. Until fairly recently, Ireland was the poorest country in Europe for centuries, for many centuries, okay? And so you can see these poor, shabby-looking people in a kind of dimly lit interior, lit by one lamp, okay, that they're eating their supper. Okay, they're eating their supper or their dinner together, sitting down at table and they're eating potatoes. Okay, so very much, it's kind of a poignant look at the life of a certain class of people at a certain time in history. You know, so it is. It looks dreary. It looks drab. It looks sad. Okay, so we have to remember that maybe after agriculture came about, this was a condition of most of the people on the planet. Okay, when even during agricultural times, okay? So, and most of the good soils, the very good productive soils in Ireland at the time, were given over to growing grain crops for export, to England. So the poor of Ireland, okay, due to several laws that you can read about in your text, okay, they're very much biased, you know, the English were very much biased against the Irish, you know. In fact, you know, what we'll talk about a little later, you know, right next, is that the Irish people depended upon potatoes. They were completely reliant on potatoes for about 100 years, maybe more, okay, with some, you know, rather disastrous kind of consequences, okay? And some people call it the Great Hunger, all right? So here, this is what the Irish people call the Great Hunger, all right? This is an image or a drawing somebody made of a woman with her 2 children, okay? They're very skinny, you can see. Okay, what happened? right? The Irish, as they grew to depend more and more on the potato, it became a staple for them, a real staple of their diet. And the thing about potatoes is it does have a lot of starch, but it does have good quantities of other kind of nutrients, okay? Most Irish peasants, Irish poor people, kept alive on a diet of potatoes and maybe milk. That was it. Okay? Sometimes they had a little bit of fish, sometimes they have a little bit of meat, but not very much. Even if you read a book such as something called Angela's Ashes, it doesn't have anything to do with me, of course, but it's a book written by a man who is now an Irish American. But it's a funny thing that I believe he was born in the United States, but his parents went back to Ireland, and it's such a story. Yeah, he has a lot of good humor in it, but it's so depressing, you know. He talks about, you know, being a young child in Ireland, you know, in the 20th century, and then what did they have to eat? They ate potatoes. Sometimes they had milk, and another thing is that once in a while they might have a bit of pork fat to cook with their potatoes. That was it. That was all they ate. Okay, this was even in the 20th century. All right. So until fairly recently, Ireland was a very poor country. There's a movie called The Commitments. Okay, it's about a rock band. Okay, basing a lot of its music on Wilson Pickett. You know, a lot of American greats of contemporary music at the time. I think it's filmed like in the 70s. I think. So there's this bunch of Irish lads and a couple of lassies. You know, and another thing is that they're socializing. They're actually standing in line on the dole. Okay, what is dole? It's actually welfare. They're standing in line to get their welfare checks, and they're socializing. This is like it was part of everyday, ordinary Irish life, because Irish people were poor people. It has actually changed a little bit. Now Ireland is pretty prosperous because they've got into technology, you know, computers and all this kind of stuff. So it's much more prosperous now, but boy, their story is very sad in Ireland, you know? So it was an Irish staple, okay? The population, okay, swelled from about 1.5 million to 8.5 million within a century, less than a century. It took for the population to almost, you know, 4 times, 5 times its size, okay? So you had a huge amount of population because people could feed. You know, they actually had these English landlords, and they could actually, on an acre of potatoes, you could grow enough potatoes to feed your family. Even if you had a fairly large family, 4, 5, 6, 7 kids or something, you could feed your family, and you could also have enough to pay for your taxes, because the English really taxed the Irish very much. Had you ever heard of something called A Modest Proposal? It's a satire written by Jonathan Swift. Okay, so in there, he's actually proposing, oh, we have an Irish problem. People are starving there. What can we do about it? So it's an ironic proposal, not to be taken seriously, but very tongue-in-cheek, and he proposes that maybe Irish people should sell their babies to be eaten, okay? So this was actually, of course, ridiculous and horrifying to even think of, but some people actually took it seriously. There are people who are kind of musing over it and wondering whether, you know, it would be feasible. It's kind of obscene when you think about it, okay? Anyway, so a lot of people got hurt because generally the Irish potato that they had there was one cultivar, one type that they vegetatively reproduced over and over and over again. Okay, so what happened? Disaster. Okay, so you had all these people subsisting on potatoes, hardly anything else that they could eat. Okay, then what happened? All right. Well, you had this fungus, okay, called Phytophthora infestans. It's an oomycete. Okay, it's a water mold kind of fungus, right? And here's some of the impact that it had. What happens generally is the leaves and the stem rot away, they blacken, and they die, okay? And of course, without any leaves to do any photosynthesis, the production of the tubers, right, the underground horizontal starchy stem can't be formed. Not just that, is that the tubers furthermore would just rot in the ground. Okay, so that Phytophthora infestans is responsible, or was responsible, for a disease they call late blight. Okay, so these years, from 1845 to 1849, these were the big years where you had this blight, this fungus hitting, and of course, nobody knew what it was. All they knew is that the potatoes were rotting, and this is actually a piece of a tuber, potato tuber, with infestation in it. They just rotted in the ground before people could even harvest it. They rendered the potatoes inedible. When you have a population of 8.5 million relying upon one crop with just one clone or one variety only that they had to rely on, you can imagine it was pretty grim, yes, at the time, all right? So for one thing, more than 1 million people in Ireland died. They either starved to death or they died of certain kinds of infectious diseases such as cholera that comes around when people are starving, okay? Then you don't have very good sanitation. And more than 1.5 million people emigrated. Emigrated means you move out of a country. When you say immigrate, IMM, that means they come into a country. But more than 1.5 million, some people say up to 2 million people might have emigrated out of Ireland. And then where did they go? What do you think? The United States, you have these big cities on the East Coast and other places that have these Irish enclaves. You have big Irish populations in certain places in the country, okay? All right, and so you have, and also in Canada, you have a lot of Irish people in Canada. You also have a lot of Irish people in Australia and New Zealand as well. This is part of something they call the Irish diaspora, when you had the Irish population just leaving, because it's impossible. If you're starving to death, you can't work, of course, so it was a very sad time. And this image shows Ireland, okay, and the population declining in Ireland between 1841 and 1851. In 10 years, some places in Ireland were depopulated by over a third. About a third of the people left or died, okay, in these areas that are shaded this dark brown color. So it was a real havoc, and it was really quite something to kind of see the non-response of the English government to this catastrophe going on, okay? So then, furthermore, so you had the white potato, having to do with the movement of peoples in the world. Okay, so in the United States, potatoes are grown also too, of course, yes. And the big three of the different states that grow potatoes are Idaho. Yeah, everybody's kind of heard of the Idaho potato, which is very famous. It's also grown in Washington State, and it's also grown in Maine. All these places, cool places. Like Ireland is another place, very cool, very wet. Okay, so the ideal conditions for the white potato to grow. But at the same time, it was through water that the Phytophthora infestans was actually communicable from one field to the next. So that was like a real terrible lot like that. And one of the reasons why we probably know a lot about potatoes in the Irish potato famine, the Great Hunger, is because many Irish people are writers. As you could tell, the stereotype of the Irish person with their blarney and their good talkers, but also a lot of Irish people have been writers as well. So this is one way to get something out there, is to be a writer, to be able to put your product out in the public so people can find out. Yeah. So this is a potato field in Maine. Okay, Maine in the United States. You can see that nowadays they use different kinds of cultivators, these machine cultivators, which are pretty much step up production pretty well, I guess. So in the United States, about half the potato crop is eaten fresh, okay, or sold fresh in the form of, potatoes, which you can buy from the supermarket of various type. You have red potatoes, you have white potatoes, and etc. Different ones that you use for baking or others that you use for making salads with, and etc. Yeah, potato is good. It really is. It's a very good food. Okay, about another half of the potato crop tends to be made to French fries. Okay, potato chips. Okay, which is kind of an interesting invention sort of thing. It's sort of an invention due to spite, not really spite, but born out of frustration. Apparently this cook, I guess in the United States, was getting frustrated because there's a customer who was kind of heckling him and complaining about his his fried potatoes, saying that he's making the slices of potatoes too thick. So what did he do? He sliced them very, very thinly, fried them in deep fried them in fat, and thus was born the potato chips. People liked it, okay? But just put salt on it and stuff, so people like this. Some also is used to make, dehydrated potato flakes that can be reconstituted to make mashed potatoes and etc. Okay, so here we have what we call French fries in the United States, and of course in England they call these chips. All right. And here are some what we in the United States call potato chips. This is what English people or British people call crisps, I believe. And this person looks like they're eating them almost like nachos. It looks like the potato, right? Fried potato, deep fried potatoes, and then you have cheese. It looks like, doesn't that look like Kraft? The kind of squeezable cheese sort of food product. And then I don't know what this red stuff is. It could be pepper, yeah, like red pepper. Something like that. It does look good, doesn't it? Yeah. Anyway, a lot of grease, your daily requirement of fat and grease in there, but still probably tastes good. And we humans, we're naturally attracted to fats and salt and sweet. This is just part of how we're made up, part of the way our bodies work. And here we have some reconstituted, probably mashed potatoes, yeah? And here this is like a typical American meal, very much meat-based. Two huge pieces of meat, plus a big helping of mashed potatoes, and you have some vegetables. It looks like maybe Italian squash or zucchini, maybe peppers, tomatoes. These are tomatoes. Yeah, so you can kind of cook vegetables pretty well. You can't go wrong if you put butter and like that on it, because it does give you some fat and it will give you salt in it too. So the easiest way to actually make food taste good, that's good for human taste, is to put fat and salt and sugar on it, you know? Sometimes that's not good, but when you think about it, think about the kind of food that you eat at restaurants, yeah? Usually when you eat vegetables, like if you order a meal and you have a vegetable served on the plate, generally they would tend to have butter and salt on it, yeah? Usually, yeah, you put fresh grated pepper sometimes on it too, which is nice, okay? So this particular plant, Solanum tuberosum, there are about 6,000 cultivars, okay, almost 6,000 cultivars, or 6,000 different varieties. So there's a lot. And of course, whenever there's any threat of any disease to these plants anymore, still, what do they do? They go back to the source. They go back to the Andes and try to bioprospect, and find some other kind of cultivar of potatoes that they can hybridize with the potatoes that they like. And then you can actually produce plants that are disease resistant, maybe pest resistant, that tend to grow in differing kind of conditions depending on the local conditions that you want to grow the potatoes at. Okay, so another thing is in the United States, only 12 varieties. Okay, so here we have a little bit of the United States. We have Alaska here, very big state. Here we have the continental United States here, and in here we have Hawaii somewhere out here. Can't really see it, but I know on one of the images that we saw earlier we could see it. But of course, right now Hawaii, the state of Hawaii, is considered part of the United States, even though there are people who are talking about, certain political issues right now, which very much you have to bear in mind. Okay. Now another thing about the potatoes, you could tell it grows in the Andes, it grows in Ireland very well, it also grows in Idaho and in Washington State, and in Maine. It's a cool season crop. Okay, it does its best at relatively cool temperatures. Okay, if you get over a certain amount, if you get over like 85 degrees or so, the tubers won't form. The plants will just not make any tubers if it's too warm. Okay. And how are they reproduced? How are they propagated? They're propagated via seed potatoes. Okay, what are seed potatoes? Okay, seed potatoes, we're going to see in just a minute here. Okay, is that just like this, like the image that you folks saw earlier. You have there, yeah, here we have an image of a plant, okay, or part of a plant, and here you have these little structures on it. A seed potato can either be small potatoes, okay, small potatoes, or they could be part of part of a larger potato that you excise, cut out, and make new plants. Okay, so it could either be individual potatoes or it could be part of a white potato. Okay, anyway, so this is showing seed potatoes. So they're propagated vegetatively. All right, they're propagated vegetatively, and in this way, this is how they do it. Okay. Let's see, now about nutrition of the potato, okay? About 25% when the potato is still, moist and still alive, generally about a quarter of it is carbohydrates, lots of starch. If you might remember when we was from lab, for those of you in lab, we would have seen starch grains, right? Leucoplasts inside of the potato. Okay, it does have a little bit of protein, okay, about 2.5% proteins. Not very much though, okay? And also the thing about white potato, as long as you don't fry it, all right? If you bake it or if you boil it, generally it's fat-free, no cholesterol, no fats. Okay, remember cholesterol is a kind of lipid, right? And another thing is a good source of potassium. Okay, potassium is a good electrolyte. It's actually, what is it called? A cation, right? Potassium generally in your body. Okay, something that you need. So with those sports drinks that you drink, when you're really thirsty, you've been running or you've been biking and you're really hot and you're very dehydrated, All Sport, Gatorade, it has electrolytes in it. That's why they say, as an advertising thing, that it quenches your thirst even better than water because it has electrolytes. It helps you to retain some water and to really get it into your cell, okay? And it also has good amounts of iron. Okay, there are some B vitamins in there and vitamin C. So therefore, the Irish peasant, in the 1800s, could actually have a diet of just potato and milk and pretty much sustain themselves and live. Okay, I know I'm going on and on about this thing. Potatoes are very good for you. They really are. okay? And another thing about the potatoes is a lot of these nutrients, these are actually usually in what they call the cortex. You have the skin, you have the cortex, interior to that, you have the beginning of the vascular tissue, because remember, it's a stem. Then inside of that, you have the pith. Generally, most of the nutrients is in the cortex, sort of right under the skin. So therefore, okay, as you see on the computer, all right, eat the skin when you're eating potatoes, okay? Eat the skin as well, because this is where most of the nutrients are. Here's a picture of vitamin C, a little model of vitamin C. Okay, alrighty, then, okay, the next group of plants we're going to talk about, okay, kind of dear to my heart. This is very good, yeah? These are sweet potatoes, also known as Ipomoea batatas. And this plant here, okay, so the potato, the white potato, is in the Solanaceae. The sweet potato is in the Convolvulaceae, also known as the morning glory family, okay? Both the white potato and the sweet potato are both dicots. Dicotyledonous types of plants, all right? And we'll think about it in a minute. What are the different qualities of a dicot, okay? I'll let you think about that. You can see it has a characteristic morning glory type flower, all right? Lots of different varieties of sweet potato, especially in Hawaii, all right? And of course, that also is something that's important to us. Now here we have the fact that these tubers are storage roots of the sweet potato, and it benefits us very well. Okay, sweet potatoes are very good because they can actually be grown in soils that are not really rich sometimes, all right? So generally, sweet potatoes tend to be cultivated from what we call slips, okay? So this is an image showing a potato plant with the tubers that are part of the roots, the underground storage roots of this plant here, okay? Now if we go under the elmo here and we look at the elmo, we can see a sweet potato. Okay, so this is one that they sell in the store as red garnet yams. It is not a yam, it's a sweet potato, you can tell. Take a look at these things here. So this is something that I think we saw earlier in the semester maybe, okay? And I just held on to it and I let it grow. And these things here are actually stems, right? These are what they call the slips, growing from pieces of the sweet potato. And here we have one here. And if you look at the leaf, you know that this is not a monocot, yeah, because it has a netted venation, okay, in the leaves. Okay, so this is actually a sweet potato because yams are actually monocots, right? So here we have a sweet potato, and it's little, so you can actually grow little sweet potato plants from these. Maybe I ought to cultivate them. I hate to throw away plant material, you know. Okay, anyway, so in that way you can kind of propagate these plants that way. Okay, through slips. You can also take vine cuttings, you know, like when you have sweet potato plants growing, they'll just grow like crazy. I mean, they really will. They'll just grow like nuts, and they're growing into places you don't want them to grow. Okay, so you can cut them back and make more plants. They're really good. You can dig around, get some good Hawaiian varieties that grow in good conditions, and you can actually make food for yourself. The plant will just make food. Do photosynthesis, it will just keep growing. You can make more, and you can get food from it. Okay, this is a miracle. This is a good thing for little kids to do. That you can actually maybe have your kids or your nieces and nephews or other children, maybe your younger siblings. This could be a good project for them, you know, making a mound of dirt and then planting sweet potatoes. They're easy to grow, okay, they can make food, and so in this way, the child can associate the food with the plant, you know, and kind of see the miracle of actually growing food. It's very important, you know, to make this kind of connections for people, okay? Another thing now, the origins of sweet potato. People think that the sweet potato is probably native to tropical areas of South America, okay? Tropical South America, okay? But from thence, it spread, okay? Came from the New World, okay? Went to Spain, okay? From Spain, it then went to the rest of the Mediterranean area. Here's the Mediterranean Sea with it's Italy, here's Greece, okay? Turkey over here. Okay, and then you have here northern Africa with Libya, Egypt, Algeria, all right? So this is the Mediterranean area, okay? One of the areas for classical civilization, what we call classical kind of civilization, the Greeks and the Romans, you know? Okay, and other peoples. It also spread to the Pacific Islands and New Zealand, amazingly, isn't it? Yeah, this is something I think we talked about before. Okay, so here's Aotearoa, also known as New Zealand. And then here you have that. So in the Hawaiian Islands, we call it uala, okay? And in Hawaii, Hawaiian people had more than 200 different names for this plant. Okay, just like when you think of the Inuit of Alaska and Canada and other parts of North America. Okay, the Inuit have more than 100 words for snow, so you know that if you have a lot of different varieties of something, that the plant is pretty important to them, okay, to people. And in Hawaii, excuse me, the uala was second only to kalo in terms of being important to the people. And the uala tended to be grown more on the leeward side because it could tolerate drier conditions. Yeah, it's not as complicated a crop to grow as kalo is. Right? So even today, people enjoy, the sweet potato in Hawaii. Very good, and you have a lot of different kind of varieties too. Very good. So you have some that are more mealy, some that are more slippery. You have some with different colors in the tubers, whether they're orange or whether they're purple or whether they're white or yellow. Okay, you have lots of different varieties. They name the varieties according to the color of the skin, the color of the inside, the color of the leaves, the color of the veins on the leaves, the shape of the veins in the leaves, and there are more than 200 different name varieties, okay, in Hawaii. Important place, okay? So here we have a map, of course, of the Hawaiian Islands, yeah? Part of the United States, okay? Ni'ihau, Kauai, Oahu, Molokai, Lanai, Kaho'olawe, Maui, and this part here is sometimes people call it Maui Nui, because way long time ago, before any humans were ever here, this was actually one single island, a large island, okay? Here's a big island of Hawaii, okay? An interesting thing, yeah? So generally, the islands further to the northwest, okay, are actually part of the Hawaiian Island chain, okay? Anyway, so sweet potato was a very important crop in old Hawaii, okay, before 1778. And even now, people enjoy, it's very good. Okay, so another question, one I cannot answer myself, okay? How did the sweet potato, if it originated in South America someplace, how did it get to the Pacific Islands area and New Zealand? Okay, so people can speculate and be sure that people actually do speculate because, of course, people curious. This is actually one of our best traits is that we're curious. We like to find out. We wonder about things. Okay, so how could it have gotten to the Pacific Islands and New Zealand? Okay, don't know. We don't know how it did that. Okay, someday maybe somebody might be able to say why, but nobody knows. Okay, people do know that it actually didn't predate the indigenous peoples of Hawaii. They don't have any evidence that it was here before people came here. So they're thinking people probably brought it here, but how? Nobody knows. We do also know that in olden days, hundreds of years ago, the Polynesian people did voyage back and forth, okay, across the South Pacific, all over in the Pacific Islands. They were very much seafarers, very much at home in the water, but nobody knows. Could it have been that Polynesian canoes might have gone to South America, taking back the uala with them back to the Pacific Islands? But if that's true, why didn't they take other crops? Why didn't they take other crops that would have been suited to Pacific Islands as well? And if, for example, there might have been voyagers from South America that might have come into the Pacific area, why didn't they bring other things? So these are interesting questions, very interesting questions, and of course, I don't know. Nobody knows at this point. Okay, so fascinating area of research if you're interested in ethnobotany or if you're interested in archaeology or anthropology. Very interesting thing to kind of discover. You can kind of stay in the Pacific area, learn about different cultures, in the Pacific Islands. Very interesting things you could do. Sometimes I think that I might have been an anthropologist if I wasn't, didn't go into botany. Anyway, another thing about the sweet potato now, getting back to the subject, is that China is a top producer in the world, okay, amazingly. It originated in South America, spread out throughout the world, and now China, which is a lot of temperate areas, okay, that this is a top producer in the world. They probably consume a lot of sweet potatoes as well. And here's a map of China. So the present day border here is here in yellow, yeah, big country. And people say that it is the most ancient continuous civilization of any other civilization in the world, okay? Now, cultivation, okay, of the potato plant. Of course, it's important in tropical areas, the subtropics, and warm temperate areas, yeah? Very important source of food still in some places, all right? And another thing about the sweet potato is that it is a staple food for some people, and also people use it to feed livestock. Did you know in Hawaii too that people used to use the sweet potato leaves as well? Because you can eat the leaves. You can either cook them and eat them like spinach, or you can eat them fresh in salads. You can eat the sweet potato leaves, okay? So another thing, they used to fatten pigs and dogs with sweet potato tubers. I think they would fatten them first with the greens and then fatten them up for when they were going to slaughter them when they're ready to eat the pig, okay, with the tubers itself. And they would also give it kalo sometimes too. Not sure. Anyway, so the sweet potato in Hawaii, another feature of it is that it was a representative of the god Lono. Okay, there were 4 main Hawaiian gods, and one of them was Lono. And so the sweet potato was associated with Lono, and another animal that was associated with Lono was the pig, the Polynesian pig, the pua'a. Okay. All right, so here's kind of showing the stockyards in Chicago. It doesn't look terrible for the animals, but still, Chicago, very well known, okay, for its stockyards, for a place where meats are processed and such, you know, for sausages, bologna, all the different kind of cold cuts that people eat, okay? Now, furthermore, the sweet potato, okay, in the United States, because it tends to be a warm type of crop, it's mostly grown in the south, the southeast, and the south of the United States, okay, mostly grown here. I guess because it tends to be more like a warm weather sort of crop, right? And do you remember who originally promoted sweet potatoes in the United States? Do you remember? This is something that we covered in an earlier lecture. Yeah, he's the same person. Okay, he's the same scientist who championed the soybean and the peanut as well. I won't tell you his name, but you have to remember, okay, this particular man, right? He was the one who originally promoted the sweet potato as a crop in the United States. Remember too that sweet potatoes can live in soil that has been kind of depleted. Okay, it can actually live very well in soil that might not be so good. Okay, so a very good crop, very good thing to grow. We can grow it in our gardens, you know. You could probably grow it in a bin in an apartment if you wanted to. Okay. So nutrition, here's an image of retinol, okay, which is a form of beta carotene, vitamin A, yeah. And here, remember vitamin A? Okay, vitamin A is necessary for vision. It actually produces a substance that your body needs in order to be able to see. Okay, so this is a map of the world that shows areas in the world, okay, where you have people who suffer from nutritionally deficient diets that have gone blind. Okay, remember we talked about that before? Yeah, so here, where it's shaded in red, here you have kind of like a high incidence of blindness due to nutritional deficiencies, and the sweet potato can actually rectify that with the beta carotene that it has in it. Usually the more highly colored a food, the more yellow or the more red or the more blue or purple a plant has, generally you have sources of this beta carotene. So you see that in these areas here, you have a lot of nutritional deficiencies, kind of high incidence of people who go blind because they don't have enough beta carotene and vitamin A in their diet. Okay, of course, you also see areas where this kind of illness is under control, North America, okay, some parts of North Asia as well, okay, but you have other areas too where you have moderate degrees of this, okay. Anyway, so it's kind of sobering when you think about it, when you're thinking of blindness, for goodness sake, you know? Terrible thing, okay? Another thing too, so it's rich in vitamins A and C. And here you have vitamin C. Again, here you have, remember scurvy? Talk about that scurvy actually is a disease caused from a lack of vitamin C. Okay, so you have your tissues coming apart fairly much because generally the pectins aren't actually there to hold the cells together, all right? So this is actually something that, I'm sorry, not pectins, collagen. Okay, I got confused about that. Okay, so collagen, very essential. Okay, so it's kind of sobering when you think about it. So make sure, you know, eat your fruits and vegetables. Your mother was right, okay? And now we have cassava, okay, Manihot esculenta, and it's in a plant family known as Euphorbiaceae, okay? Euphorbiaceae, okay, are a group of plants, and it's related to kukui. You know kukui nut? It's in the same family, okay? They're the spurges, the spurge family. And it's another dicot as well. Okay, and of course, what people use is the root of this plant generally. All right, and furthermore, this plant is also called manioc, also known as cassava. Okay, also known as tapioca. All right, and this is very important. It's actually fourth as a source of calories for people in the tropics. Right, very important plant. Okay, okay. So how did it come? First, it was native to tropical South America, even though some people think that it might have been domesticated in a different area as well, in Central America or Mesoamerica. So remember, this is one of 2 different kind of crops that perhaps were independently domesticated in Central America and South America, independent of each other. Okay, cotton is the other one. Okay, from the Americas, the Portuguese took it to Africa, where right now it's a very important source of starches. Okay, we also have the Portuguese also taking it to Asia, because you had the Dutch East India Company, Dutch East India Company, something like that. Okay, so the Portuguese, okay, was responsible. So here we have Asia. Okay, and right now, Africa is a top producer, so it's an interesting case again of a plant that's not native to a particular area being produced by the people of a different area where it was introduced into. Before we talked about China being the top producer of sweet potato, but here we have Africa being the top producer of cassava. Okay, Asia is second place, and then South America is sort of like a distant third, right? Even though that's where it came from. So generally, you take cuttings of the stem in order to propagate this. So all the plants that we're talking about today oftentimes are mostly vegetatively propagated. Okay, lots of varieties, and they tolerate different conditions in terms of dryness. They can tolerate, have some that can grow in soils that don't have much nutrients in, depleted soils. This is one of the reasons why it's actually another good crop, can grow in poor soils. Another thing about it is due to some of the principles, some of the properties of this plant, it is resistant to pests. Okay, why is that? Because you have to prepare it. Why is that? Okay, so here we have tapioca pudding, which pretty much is vanilla pudding with those pearls, you know, the tapioca granules or beads in there. Okay, how do they prepare that? They will actually get the cassava and heat it over in a pan. Okay, heat it, and then they'll actually have the particles sticking to each other and kind of gummy things. You also have those what do you call it? Bubble drinks that people drink. Yeah, from I guess from Southeast Asia. Okay, it's very good, very tasty, but it's very expensive. You know, to me anyway. Now, this preparation, you could either have sweet cassava or bitter cassava, and it depends on how much of this thing called hydrocyanic acid happens to be present in it. And this hydrocyanic acid is actually cyanide, a form of cyanide. So here you have a hydrogen, okay, bonded with a carbon, which is triple bonded. I think it's triple bonded. Yeah, triple bonded to a nitrogen. Okay, it's a poison. Okay, a nerve poison. So usually the bitter type needs to be treated more. You have to dry that, or you can soak it in water, okay, or you can boil it, or you could grate it and then let it sit, and then have the bad stuff get kind of diffused away, drain it. You could ferment it. So different places had different ways of actually processing this plant, but you need to process most of them most of the time. The very sweet ones you don't really have to. Okay, but it can be sweet in one place, it could be bitter in another, with more hydrocyanic acid being produced depending on where you're planting it, depending on the soil. So here's some. You have it sitting in here in water, which is one way you could prepare it. You can slice it and dry it in the sun. Okay, you can cook it. Yeah. So usually too, the root, the fresh root, tends to decay faster than when you process it. And people can process it, then dry it, and then keep it, you know, for months, sometimes even years, in case they need it. Okay. Now about this plant also, okay, about 30% of it is starch. When you have a piece of fresh root, there's very low protein. So people who rely very heavily on cassava for their diets, and they don't take very much protein in otherwise, okay, they tend to be, you can have that situation, what is it called, kwashiorkor, which is what happens when you have a high starch diet and not enough protein. It's a nutritional deficiency too. It also contains calcium, some B vitamins, some vitamin C, okay? Now this next one we're going to talk about is yams, okay? So there are a bunch of different species in a genus called the Dioscorea, okay? These are plants in the plant family Dioscoreaceae, and these are monocots, all right? So here you can see that it has sort of like a adaptation, sort of like a refined or sort of a take on parallel venation, okay? Heart-shaped leaves. And these are tropical tubers. They can actually be cultivated in many tropical areas: Africa, Asia, the different Pacific islands such as Tonga, okay, Caribbean area too, okay, Asia, Pacific Islands, and the Caribbean, okay. So generally they can be about the size of a potato, and some of them can be almost as big as a person. I've known women that weighed less than 90 pounds, you know. Anyway, so you can see these people here, I think these people might be from Tonga, I think. So you can see how big the root can get. So actually digging it up is a big chore because they tend to root really deep, you know. Anyway, so they can be really big, these tubers, you know. Okay. In Hawaii, This is also cultivated. It was called either, depending on the species, it was called uhi or pia or hoi, all right? 3 different kinds of yams in Hawaii was cultivated. Did you know that the first export out of Hawaii was probably yams, because the ships that docked in to Honolulu Harbor, you know, or in Lahaina, or probably Honolulu Harbor, they actually took away with them yams, because yams kept better, whereas sweet potatoes tended to sprout fairly quickly, you know. So the area that's bordered by King Street and Beretania, okay, and also I think it was Bishop Street and Alakea. That's a good-sized chunk of downtown Honolulu. You know, one of the maybe the most prime real estate area in the world. Some of the most prime real estate in the world. And that used to be a yam field. It was an enterprise, you know, where people were actually growing yams for export. So that was the first product exported out of Hawaii. Amazing, yeah. Okay. Now here's a picture of part of a yam root. Okay. Another thing too is that it is a source of saponins. This is like soapy sort of things that you can kind of beat, and it's almost like soapy. And these can be used to make sex hormones, right? Here's an image of estradiol, all right? So this is actually something that people have made supplements from wild yam supplements, okay? So here you can see a little bit better look at a yam leaf. Okay, so you can see that you do have sort of parallel venation, because remember, yam, Dioscoriaceae, it's a monocot. Okay, it's a monocot, all right? So yams, even though they look similar, they're very similar looking in some ways to sweet potatoes. They're not the same thing. They're different, okay? One is a dicot, one is a monocot, for one thing. Sort of like an example of parallel evolution. So generally, you could plant them on hills, okay? And they really like the wet areas, wet lowland tropical areas. So some Hawaiian people, they used to actually plant it out, you know, also out in the forest, and they just harvested it whenever they needed to. They didn't really cultivate them. Some people didn't really cultivate them per se. They just plant them out in the forest and then let them grow and then harvest them as they needed them. Now another one, very important plant in Hawaii is taro, okay? In Hawaii we call it kalo, yeah? Colocasia esculenta. This is another tropical monocot, all right, in the plant family Araceae. So it is related to Anthurium. It is related to peace lily or Spathiphyllum, okay? It's related to Dieffenbachia, or what they call dumb cane, okay? And the corm, remember the corm is a vertical underground stem of the plant, is used to make a very, very important food for Hawaiian people, which is called poi. How do you do that? Okay, generally the men would be the ones to cultivate this plant, because the kalo was considered to be a representative or a body form of the god Kane, which is the second, second of the 4 main Hawaiian gods. Excuse me, sort of like tripping all over myself here. But here you can see the corm, and these are really big taro plants. All right. So generally it was the men who took care of the plants. It was also the men who pounded the poi, or pounded the pa'iai, and then pounded the poi. So first of all, they would take the corm. Okay, this is some corms of taro, and they would cook it in an oven. But for one thing, kalo was very important in Hawaiian culture. Okay, very important. Okay, it was actually considered to be the plant itself was considered to be like a relative to Hawaiian people, and they honored it. Okay, so here's an image of a lo'i with a couple of people on the banks of the lo'i with the kalo plants in here, taro plants in here, okay? And this is a beautiful image of the Hanalei Valley on Kauai, where much of the kalo grown for poi, as consumed today, is produced. Another thing about the kalo, similar to the uala, you can also eat the leaves, okay? This is the leaves that people call luau, right? You can actually wrap pork and or fish and or chicken in there, and then and just wrap it in there, wrap it in tea leaves, and cook it in an imu or steam it, yeah. And they make that. It's called laulau, yeah. Anyway, so the corm of the plant is a part used for poi. First of all, you cook the corm in an underground oven called an imu. Okay, nowadays people tend to steam it, or they tend to bake it or something like that, right? Another thing is that generally you have to cook it for a long time, because all parts of the plants have calcium oxalate crystals in them. If you eat raw kalo corm, or if you eat raw taro leaves, or ones that haven't been cooked enough, you'll feel like a stinging sensation. It's like a bunch of little needles poking into your lips and into your tongue and into your mucous membranes in your throat. It makes you itchy, you know, or painful. Okay, so you have to cook it long enough so that the calcium oxalate crystals break down. So this is why one of the reasons why taro is a good source of calcium, because you have the calcium oxalate crystals that is broken down that your body can use the calcium with. It is pounded, it was in the olden days pounded by men only into a form called pa'i'ai, and then more water was added then to make poi. Okay, now, even now, you can't keep poi in the stores. Whenever, you know, they have enough poi to put in the stores, generally people buy it all up because people still love poi. It was a food of choice, okay, for Hawaiian people. This is what they preferred the best. So it has about a quarter of it is about carbohydrates, has about 2% protein and not very much fat at all. Okay, very easy to digest. Excellent source of calcium. Okay, now the kalo or the taro originated in Southeast Asia. Okay, this area here that's kind of colored green on this map, all right? Thence it spread to Japan, to the Pacific Islands, okay, including Hawaii, as far east as Hawaii, all right? And then to India, okay, to the Mediterranean, okay, then from the Mediterranean into Africa, okay, then into the Caribbean area, then finally to South America. So this is another crop that has kind of circled the world in a way, you know? Now the last plant that we're going to talk about is called the Jerusalem artichoke, okay? It's sort of like a misnomer in a way, okay, but still, interesting plant, Helianthus tuberosus. And this is a plant that is in the plant family, the Asteraceae, which is probably the second largest family of plants, okay, in the Magnolia phyta, or in the flowering plants. Okay, so here's a picture of some of them. They grow like crazy, okay, mostly in temperate areas, okay? So it is a tuber of a North American sunflower. Okay, so you remember the sunflower family, you have all these individual flowers and an inflorescence known as a head or a capitula, right? Anyway, so it is the tubers of a sunflower of North America, okay? From there it spread to Europe. In the 1600s, it got to be pretty popular, I think, at one point. And this is a picture of the tubers, the root tubers of this, which in the plant, of course, is the root storage organ for it against hard time. Okay? So generally it was used as a vegetable. Okay, we used to feed animals with. An interesting thing about this plant is that it's 10% protein, so it's high in protein. It doesn't have any fats and it doesn't have starch. Think about it, because we're talking about starchy staples, but this is one that doesn't have starch. Think about that. Why is that so? Okay, so take a look at this. Here you have a little image of fructose in its open chain form. So it's rich in a substance known as inulin. Okay, 76, we're very rich in it. And inulin is a polymer of fructose. But that doesn't have anything to do with starch, because remember, starch is a polymer of glucose, which is a different sugar, yeah? Now this is actually interesting because inulin can be taken without some of the bad effects that some people might suffer from glucose, because the fructose is a sugar instead. Fructose is also sweeter than glucose, okay? It's actually like 1.5 times sweeter than sucrose, all right? So generally, in the olden days, it was actually used as a treatment or a folk remedy for diabetes, okay? Because generally people with diabetes can tolerate, okay, fructose better than they can tolerate glucose, all right? That's not saying that if you have diabetes, you should rush out and get some of this, but it might be interesting, yeah? Anyway, so this, interestingly, it was a folk remedy for diabetes, okay? So the tubers, okay, maybe 3 inches long, 4 inches long, okay, about 1 to 2 inches thick, right? And so you could eat it fresh, or you could eat it prepared. You know, it could be sautéed, it can be fried, okay, it can be baked, all right? It's supposed to be pretty delicious, I think. It's supposed to be sort of sweet. And generally this plant tends to be cultivated via its tubers, okay? Another thing about this plant, which is fairly interesting, is that it is adaptable to different kinds of soils and habitats. It can actually live in a pretty wide range, but it tends to be more like a North American sort of plant, you know, where you have cool seasons. Another thing about this plant is it's pest resistant. It's like a weed. You can grow it almost like a weed. Easy to grow plant, you know, some of the other starchy staples that we've looked at, even though this one doesn't have starch, but still. Okay, so the other staples that we've looked at today, it's hardy and it tends to resist pests, just like some of the others, okay? Anyway, in summary, okay, what are we going to say? For one thing, okay, we went through a little bit about the storage organs of plants. Okay, secondly, we talked about the main starchy staples that we have under cultivation in the world today. Okay, so we talked a lot about food and everything like that. So what I can say is, bon appetit, all right? Eat with good appetite. Okay, so anyway, so that's all that we have time for today, and that's all that we have to cover today, and we'll see you next time. Okay, aloha.